What's up, everybody? Welcome to Worship Matters. I'm Jonathan, and today we're going to be checking out an oldie but a goodie. An old hymn called Come Thou Long Expected Jesus. If you've been in the Baptist life like I have, or Protestant life, you've probably heard this 1,000 times. Although there are different melodies to this, so just be aware of that. One of the nice things about old hymns is you could switch up the melodies. They were written in a way that you could really interchange them and mix it up a little bit. But that's another discussion for another time. We're going to talk about this today. But first, if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe. If you enjoy this video, give us a like. And if you have any songs you'd like me to do, let me know in the comments. I'd love to check it out. Better hurry up because we only got a couple more weeks of Christmas music. And so, yeah. All right. Let's hop into our worship guidelines. Directional, musically repeatable, theologically sound, the Bob test, artistic license, and the congregational versus personal. So, if you don't know what those mean, I did a whole video on it. Link will be in the description. You can go check that out. Let's hop into this. All right. So, our verse for today is Matthew 1. I'm not going to read this whole genealogy, but we're going to talk about it. So, part of the long expected Jesus is that Jesus was expected for a long time. He was promised to Abraham and to David. And so this genealogy shares a lot of insight about the history from the Old Testament, and it's bringing that history into the New Testament, into the birth of Christ. So we'll see here in verse 17, so all the generations of Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the deportation of Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. Now, Matthew does skip some generations in here. So that's a discussion for another time. At least that's my understanding. I'm not a biblical scholar, so I'm not really well versed in that, but there are people who have talked about this, so you can go check those guys out. They're a lot more wizened in the knowledge of this, but we're going to look at some things. So we have from Abraham to David here, and then we have from David to Babylon here, and we have from Babylon to the Messiah here. So we have three different sections that Matthew has broken the genealogy of Jesus into. One of the reasons the Jews kept genealogies is because of this promise to Abraham back in the Old Testament that unto him a son will be born, and to David. And so, so through these forefathers, these promises were made. And so a couple of things I want to point out in this is, of course, Jesus was from the tribe of Judah. We have, interestingly about this genealogy, is we actually have really five women that show up in this, which is very uncommon in the biblical genealogies. And I think the reason Matthew's doing this is to point out some of these women of faith from the Old Testament. So we have Tamar, who was this... If I remember correctly, she's the wife of Judah's son, but Judah died and didn't have a son with her, so she tricks Judah into having children to fulfill the promise owed her, and so she has children with Judah, and she becomes in the lineage of Christ. Then we have Rahab, who's from the book of Joshua. And she, I believe she was a prostitute. And so she and her family, the people that she brought into her house, were the only ones saved in the fall of Jericho. So you can go read that and check that out. But she's mentioned as a grandmother of Christ, just like Tamar. And then we have Bathsheba. Did I skip one? Ruth. So we have Ruth. If you read the book, or the book of Ruth, Ruth is a Moabitess. And so she is grafted into Abraham. We have an early Gentile being brought into the faith of the Messiah. And so Ruth is actually, interestingly, the daughter-in-law of Rahab, assuming that there's no people between Rahab and Boaz. But I don't, in this case, I don't think that's the case. So Ruth is the daughter of Rahab, which is interesting. So that puts the time of Ruth right after or during the time of the book of Joshua. And so so far we have a wife who acted like a prostitute to get her father-in-law pregnant, rather than doing it the more proper way. And really part of that was a sin of her brother-in-laws. And then we have Rahab, who was a prostitute, if I remember correctly. And then we have Ruth, who was a Moabitess, who forsook her heritage to, stay in the line of Christ, or stay into the people of God. And then we have Bathsheba, who cheated on her husband with David, and who David then killed her husband. And then she became, not only the in the lineage of the Messiah, but also part of the. She became the queen, the mother of the king, Solomon. So we have these four women who are pointed out in the history of the Old Testament, some of which were more flawed than others, because Ruth is generally, other than her heritage, she's actually generally portrayed as a very righteous woman. The others, they've done some really bad stuff. And you could say this really about David too, who he cheated on his wife with Bathsheba, and and so he married multiple women, but still God called him a man after my own heart. And so we have these fallen people that God has included in the lineage of the Messiah. So that's really interesting. Lastly, so we have Jeconiah. And I could be wrong, but Jeconiah is actually cursed by God in Jeremiah 22. So you can go check that out. This is Matthew, by the way. Jeconiah is cursed that his descendants will not be his son will not be sit on the throne of God. So what is he doing on this genealogy of Christ? Well, interestingly, who is his grandson, down the line? Well, it's Joseph. And we know that Joseph is not the father of Jesus. He's the man that God chose to father him, but he is not the actual biological father. And so even though Jeconiah, his lineage was cursed to not have the Messiah, we see that he's still included in this lineage of the man who would eventually father Jesus, even if he wasn't biologically his father. So if you go over to Luke, you'll see Mary's genealogy, and you'll see that she has a genealogy to back all the way to Adam. Luke goes to Adam for whatever reason. So he has everybody. He's like, Abraham's not early enough. I'm going to go to Adam. And so, but Mary's genealogy goes to David and to Abraham and Judah and Adam. So interesting stuff here. That's why you don't skip genealogies in the Bible. They tell you a lot of things that aren't in there. Of course, all these other people have their own stories. Those are just ones I wanted to point out. But the one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is Jesus was prophesied to Abraham. Maybe not specifically that way. He was promised to Adam. In Genesis 3, we have him promised to Judah, that Judah, the scepter would rise from Judah. We have him promised to David, and many of these other people. There's promises, those are the main covenants, though. So we have this Messiah that's been prophesied throughout the Old Testament, and it makes sense that the New Testament starts off with a genealogy showing that, hey, all of these promises, they're fulfilled in Christ. Jesus is the fulfillment of of those things. So there's our little verse for today. I didn't read it all, but we want to talk about it. This is a short song, so that's why I'm spending a little more time in the Bible, But let's hop over to "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus," which is probably the reason you're really here. Okay, so this is done by a group called the Petersons. I don't know why they changed the O to an E, but whatever. They're not Peter's sons, they're Peter's sins. Sorry. All right, let's watch this. So we have a guitar. We got another guitar.
Come thou long expected Jesus, born to set thy people free from our fears and sins. Release us, let us find our rest in thee. Is our strength and
I'm just gonna play the whole first verse.
hope of all the earth thou art, dear desire of every nation, joy of every longing heart.
All right, so we got a guitar here. We got another guitar here. It's played differently. It's got metal, and it gives a different resonance. It sounds a lot more like a banjo. Then we have a banjo. We got a mandolin. We got an upright back here. You can't really see most of the time. She's got a violin that she's barely playing, but she'll play it further over here. So honestly, though, if she would sit up straight rather than crouching forward and leaning into the mic, she'd sound a little better. I'm not saying she sounds bad. I'm just saying she would sound better. She'd have more resonance if she would, straighten up a little bit. Yeah, just a little critique there. No harm done or intended. Okay, so here is verse 1. By the way, this is done by Charles Wesley. There you go, up here. So this is an old hymn. He's back in the 1700s. And this is in 700 hymnals, so everybody's probably heard this. All right, so "Come, thou long expected Jesus, born to set thy people free." So we have a calling out to Jesus to come. Okay, so we have two questions here. Is this calling? Is this hearkening back as if they were in the shoes of those who are before Christ, calling for Christ to come to earth in 3 BC or whatever they want to say Jesus was really born. So it could be, but I think actually this is looking forward to the return. We'll talk about that. So, "Come thou long expected Jesus." We're calling directly to Jesus. Hey, you Jesus, come. And then we have a descriptor. "You were born to set thy people free." So why should he come? Because he has a purpose, and his purpose that he was born with was to set his people free. Also, from our fears and sins, release us. And now this is for us. "Let us find our rest in thee." So this is, if you will, it's verse 1, and then you could technically call this the chorus 1, and then we have a chorus 2. But you could actually call this 4 different verses, but this wasn't. I don't think it was written as a with music. I think it was just written as a text. I could be wrong. I don't know. That was 300 years ago. I could be wrong. Okay. So then we have. So he's. And this is kind of to the audience. "Let us find our rest in thee," but it's directed to Jesus. So Jesus was born to set his people free and to release us from our fears and sins and to give us rest in himself. And so therefore, the call is for him to come. All right. Of course, we've already talked about the long expected part. All right. And then we have Israel's strength and consolation, hope of all the earth, thou art, dear desire of every nation, joy of every longing heart. So Israel, Jesus is the strength and consolation of Israel. So Israel, back in the Old Testament, they were looking forward to Christ. It's just the Messiah that was coming. That was their promise that they looked forward to. Now we are looking back on Jesus, and it is our strength that keeps us going forward. We also have a promise of Jesus' return, so we have something to look forward to. And so he is the hope of all the earth. Why? Because the gospel is for all people and is the desire of every nation. And so even the people who don't realize it, they have a longing and desire for Christ. And then he is also the joy of every longing heart. So every heart that is longing for joy, well, the only fulfillment of that is in Christ. And that's the first verse. That's what he is saying there. And he's saying it to Jesus. So we have a directional here that this is directed to Christ. He's calling Jesus the one who would set his people free, the releaser of fears and sins, the one in which we find rest, the strength and consolation of Israel and really God's people. He is the hope, he is the desire, and he is the joy of all peoples. All right. Sounds good to me. Let's go to verse 2. There we can see the bass now. She needs to be near the mic. And that's basically the song. Okay. That is basically the song. They do some other stuff, but we're not going to do that. You can go watch it. They jump into a different song, which is cool. I've listened to a couple of their songs. They sound really good together. All right, verse 2. Born, so this is still talking about Jesus, the long-expected Jesus. Born thy people to deliver. So we have a similar to this, set thy people free. Born to people to deliver. He was born a child, and yet he was born a king. So when Jesus was born, he was a king. Born to reign in us forever. Now thy gracious kingdom bring. So this is where I say he's actually looking forward to the return, the second coming of Christ. This isn't a song about the first coming. This is a song about the second coming. So we have here, Jesus was born to deliver his people. So we kind of have like a connection from the first verse. This might have all been one long thing. I don't know. Born, and though he was born a child, he is a king. So Jesus was born as a baby, and he was wrapped in swaddling clothes. And there's some interesting like connections that, who is it? John Milton makes in one of his Christmas hymns about how you have the Word who couldn't speak. You had the light of the world that was born at night. You have a lot of these contrasts. You have this the one that's holding all things together, and he can't. He's wrapped in swaddling clothes, so he can't like move. So he's restrained himself by Mary and Joseph, wrapping him tightly so he won't hurt himself. And for comfort, even though he is, as God, holding all things together. So there's a lot of like contrast like that. So even though he was a child, he was a king. He's born to reign in us forever. And then so he calls, now bring about your gracious kingdom. And so there's this longing for the reign and rule of Christ to be brought about in fullness. Now, Christ, come back and bring about your kingdom. Stop. Why are we waiting? Come, bring about the fullness of the kingdom now. And so that is kind of the plea here. All right, by thy own eternal Spirit, rule in all our hearts alone. By thine all-sufficient merit, raise us to thy glorious throne. So we have two sections here. By thine own eternal Spirit, rule in all our hearts alone. So this is talking about the Holy Spirit, I believe. And so I think this also ties in with the born to reign in us forever. Rule in our hearts alone. And so he's calling for Jesus through the Spirit to reign in our hearts. And so, in a sense, we are like many kingdoms of God. God is ruling within our heart. And he wants it to be God alone that is ruling us. And then lastly, by your sufficient merit, raise us to thy glorious throne. So here we have a little bit of the gospel, that we are insufficient. But Jesus, his works are sufficient. So the merit of Christ is all sufficient to raise us up to the throne of God. And so we have this ending. While we're waiting for this kingdom to come, the prayer is that Christ would come and raise us by his merit, by his glory, by his righteousness, would make us righteous so that we could come before the throne of God. So that is the song. Let us jump over to our worship guidelines and see what we think. All right, directional. This is directed to God. This is directed to him, and it's a prayer. It's a calling for God, for Jesus, specifically the Son, to come bring about his kingdom. And so there's a lot of parallels to how Israel prayed for the coming Messiah. But now, post the first coming of Christ, we're praying for the Messiah to come again because he's promised to do so. So in Israel's days, they promised that the Messiah would come the first time. And then when Jesus came, he promised he would come again and restore his kingdom and bring about the fullness of his kingdom. And so now the prayer for Christians is, hey, just like we prayed for you back, just like your people prayed for you back then, your people are now here praying for you to come again and bring about the end, bring about the fullness of the kingdom. And so we also have a little bit of the gospel. So we'll get into the theologically sound here. We'll come back to the musically repeatable. The theologically sound here, you get a little bit of the gospel in there too. So I think this is there are some I could see why some people who, depending on their eschatology, might complain about some of this song, but I think it's fine. I think it's vague enough where you could really interpret it in any of the eschatologies, but that's me. I could see why some people would disagree with it, but I think it's vague enough eschatologically that all of us could agree that we should be praying for Christ to come back. And in the way that's said in this song. So you might have an issue depending on what eschatology you come from. Eschatology is just a big word for how you think the end will come, how you interpret Revelation, the end of days. So that's some people, we're going to disagree on that. Those are lesser issues in my mind, things that it's okay for us as Christians to disagree on. So I'm not as worried about that, but personally I think it's vague enough where I don't mind. I think that most Christians can agree with this. So I'm going to give it a pass on theologically sound. Musically repeatable, I think it's good. It's really easy. It's a lot of the old hymns, we've sung them for so long. Most people know the hymn. Now, I'm not opposed to singing it with a different tune. I have heard it with different tune, but I am partial to the one that I grew up with. I'm sure most people are. Bob test. I think there's enough in here. I don't know that you really think of people. I don't think there's really many people you could replace Jesus with in this song, because there's not a lot of people who are born a child and yet a king. There's not a lot of people who are releasing us from fear and sin. So I think it's pretty obvious it's talking about God, specifically the Son of God, Jesus. And we have the Spirit mentioned in here. So Even though they didn't capitalize it, I would, and I would interpret that as the Holy Spirit reigning in our hearts. All right, artistic license. I think it's fine. I mean, it is artistic in its own way, so it's not really saying anything differently than I would. Congregational versus personal. I think this is good congregational. We're directing our call and praise to Christ. So, I mean, I would honestly sing this one all year because it really isn't a Christmas song. It has Christmas elements to it, but it's not talking about the first coming of Christ. It's really talking about the second coming. And so why shouldn't we sing this all year? Yeah. Maybe some people do. Let me know if your church sings it all year. Let me know. I'm curious. I think we should. Even though I feel like because we have like, oh come, Emmanuel, come thou long expected Jesus, when we're calling Christ to come, everybody thinks of the birth of Christ. But no, this one is not. This one is specifically calling for Christ to return the second time, the second coming of Christ. So let me know what you think. Do you like this song? Would you sing this in another outside of Christmas? I certainly would. Of course, I would sing most Christmas songs outside of Christmas. But let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, I appreciate it. I'll catch you next time. Peace.